therefore new culture. One of the hardest things to do is actually identify the right stories to tell. So a little later, I'm going to describe 4 different types of stories that will help you and your team identify those opportunities for storytelling. In storytelling, the impact is most important. Impact is actually paramount to describing an experience. It's more important to talk about why something mattered than it is to really get into the details of what happened. So you'll notice when I told my story at the very beginning, I didn't describe the wheelchair in detail. I didn't tell you what John and Mary were wearing, but I described how they were feeling and how I was feeling as a result. I always remember what Maya Angelou said. I've learned that people will forget what you said. They will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And so that's something to keep in mind when you've identified a story and you're trying to figure out how to tell it in a way that actually makes a difference. So it's time to get those Sharpies and Post-it notes for a minute. I don't expect you to actually like sit down and write out a whole story, but I do want you to think about maybe the last week. Think about the teams that you're working with. Think about how you felt at different points over the last week. And then identify one story that you could tell a different team or a leader or someone else in the organization that would make an impact. So I'm going to give you just a minute or two to think about that and write that down. Okay, well, hopefully you have at least something to jog your memory later so you can keep that in mind as we go through the different types of stories, because you might be able to identify what type of story that you just wrote down. So I want to tell you quickly about an experience that I had with a client. At one point, I was a consulting coach and I was essentially on the bench. And we had a client where a couple of our coaches had been there for quite some time, 12, 18 months or so. And they were describing a bit of a plateau in the organization. And so since I was on the bench, I had the opportunity to go and visit this client with them and just be a new set of eyes. So I spent a week talking to people, kind of wandering around, asking to interview people and just kind of talking about what was going on. And as the week went on, I realized what was happening. And so I sat down with the other coaches and I said, you don't have an agile transformation problem. You have a marketing problem. And they both kind of looked at me and I said, and I'm not talking about the department. There are amazing things going on in these teams that nobody knows about because there are no channels for telling those stories. There's no opportunity for other teams to hear what's going on. And so from that point, we kind of made an effort to create those channels. And I do want to talk about that in a little bit too, is looking for ways to tell stories. So I've come to determine that there what helps me is there's 4 types of stories. There's top down, there's bottom up, there's inside out, and there's outside in. And each one of them has its own place. And I'm sure there's many other types too, but this is what helps me to identify when there might be a story to tell.